listeners. Welcome back to the Discipline Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Aria, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's podcast, we are going to be talking about a subject that we really haven't put too much thought into before this topic came to mind.
Yeah.
And so we thought we would talk about it with you all and kind of suss through our feelings
It
on
might be
this.
interesting today. This might be a really interesting one.
And this topic is, can you have a domestic discipline relationship without having set rules?
Ooh.
So, initial thoughts?
Well, as I said, this is going to be interesting today because I think you're going to find that Aria and I are a little divided on this. I say no. You have to have rules.
And I say yes.
Surprise, surprise.
So why? Okay, so do you want to elaborate on your position on the subject first, and then I will?
Sure. I'm like, should I? I'll probably get into some politics at some point. So should I give my usual spiel?
Not to get political.
And here's my thoughts. The reason I believe that you can't have a domestic discipline relationship without rules is because that's the whole point of why this thing works. Is you have a set of rules that are set up, and if those rules are violated, then punishment is given. And I guess the simplest answer before I elaborate is, if you don't have any rules, then what's the point calling it a domestic discipline relationship? Then you just have a regular old relationship. How do you know what to enforce? How do you know what not to enforce? And so I get that's my short spiel.
Well, I think that if you have a discipline aspect to your dynamic, then you can call yourself domestic discipline. I think the discipline is what divides a relationship from being a normal relationship, as you like to say, in a domestic discipline relationship.
And by the way, when we say normal, we're just using those terms.
Typical, average,
like we're not. We don't like labels with a lot of things, and
we're not saying normal as in more correct.
Right? Exactly. I just want to clarify that real quick.
I don't think that domestic discipline is wrong, but I also don't think it's more correct than not having domestic. I feel like everybody gets to decide what is the best for their individual relationships.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think the discipline is what divides that, right?
Yeah, and well, yeah, but I would also say that. Again, you got to have parameters. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're playing pin the tail on the donkey.
Okay, but that's an interesting point. You say you have to have parameters, but that gets into the weeds of, do you have to have set pre-negotiated rules, or can you just simply have standards? Because both are parameters. And
but isn't your point of view what we're debating today? Isn't your point of view that it's just a kind of a free for all? There's no standard at all.
No, I think that any husband that takes a leadership role in his relationship has to set standards.
Okay,
there has to be standards for the home. There has to be standards of acceptable behavior. There has to be standards, but that doesn't mean that there has to be pre-negotiated rules.
Then how do you know what the standards are?
Because in my opinion, again, this is just me, I view it as, and for lack of a better imagery here, the standard is the umbrella. It's the overarching, this is the standard of the home, is that, just to use an example, respect. Respect is a standard of the home, right? So within that, you can, if you want to, set up rules of what is and is not acceptable. And we talked about this in the rules podcast, where you set the standard, and then you set rules underneath that standard to support the standard, right?
Correct.
So I'm just saying that you can have domestic discipline without the rules underneath the standard. You can just have the big standards and then let every situation kind of be judged or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, have it
play out.
Well, and just like, so let's just say that, for instance, let's say we didn't have specific rules in our relationship.
Okay.
And let's say I got a little sassy with you. Well, you can, in that moment, judge my intentions.
Uh-huh.
Was I intending to just be kind of silly and playful, or was my intention to be undermining and undercut your authority? And so, and because you have the standard of respect, you can hold me accountable and punish me for that sassiness based on your assessment of the situation.
But see, here's the issue that I have with that. And it's the same I'm going to equate it to by not having a posted speed limit. Then if there's a standard that you shouldn't speed, that's very relative, because we know from watching people just in our everyday lives, especially on the freeway, that people that speed go above the posted speed limit. Those are the people that I'm always like, man, I hope that person gets pulled over, gets the rules get enforced, and they get a ticket or whatever, because they are breaking the rules. Well, if we were living in a country that didn't have a posted speed limit, and they just said the standard is not to speed, well, speeding to somebody could be 50 miles an hour, or speeding could be 100 miles an hour. So how do you know if the standard is just don't speed?
Okay, well, you bring up a good point, because in that situation, now our law is kind of backwards from the standpoint that there's not a whole lot of prevention.
Well, I would agree.
It's all accountability,
right? It's all accountability, right? There's no prevention, right?
And I think in a healthy domestic discipline dynamic, you have, some prevention and some accountability, and they work harmoniously together.
True.
Towards the end goal. But since you brought up the law, let's use the law as an example. You are speeding, you get pulled over, but you are speeding because you have a woman in labor in the car, or there's a medical emergency. There are times where you won't get a ticket. There will be no accountability because you have a quote unquote good reason. There's times even that you get pulled over, and because you have never been pulled over before, you're respectful to the police officer, you may still get off with a warning.
I've had a few of those.
And then there's times where it doesn't matter.
When I was accidentally speeding, by the way.
Well, and I was about to say, and then there's times where it doesn't matter. I remember when we lived in Colorado, you got very upset because you were accidentally speeding because around the corner, the speed limit of the road dropped 5 miles an hour.
And I didn't realize that it dropped,
And you didn't realize it, but you got a ticket for that.
I did.
And so there's times where, depending on who pulls you over, what the circumstances are, there might be different accountability. And that's all I'm saying, is that there might be some people out there that say, hey, we're going to set up standards. We're still going to have a conversation about the potential outcomes, the potential consequences. But then it's kind of all left up to circumstantial nuances and assessment.
I still think that even though there can be exceptions, like some of the ones that you just named, the ends doesn't justify the means. So in other words, just because you have those rare exceptions doesn't mean that you should have rules not posted. So just because occasionally you might not get a ticket for speeding because you have a good excuse doesn't mean we should do away with speed limits.
Well, and I think dynamics that don't necessarily have set rules, there is like understood parameters. Does that make sense?
Well, no, that's true. What I'm saying is I'm not saying that there couldn't be. In fact, there's probably I would bet that there's at least one, but maybe more, of domestic discipline relationships that listen to our podcast that maybe function this way. But I would probably say they're the exception, not the rule.
See, and I think that it depends because domestic discipline isn't necessarily a new concept. It's something that, in my opinion, has, existed for many, many generations. It used to be even represented in media and pop culture. Think about the old movies. Even I Love Lucy.
Lucy?
Well, there were scenes where he would, pull her over his knee, and it was done very
those are hilarious, by the way.
Yeah, it was done very comedically and in jest, but I think that that's because I was representative of things that were happening at that time. And so I would say that couples that may be of that generation or children of that generation where they kind of grew up, they're less likely to have more itemized rules rather than understood standards. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think that the younger generations, the 20-somethings, 30-somethings, they're more likely because we're in our mid to late 30s. We did not grow up with a culture of authority and accountability. In fact, I would say our generation grew up very much.
Oh, I thought you meant us individually. I was like, wait a minute. No, that's not the way my house
I mean,
was.
generationally and societally,
right.
Our generation was
the millennials as a whole, right?
As a whole,
we're millennials. By the way,
it was kind of like bucking the system and making your own way in the world, and not really having
stick it to the man.
Kind of. I mean,
I mean, a little bit. I'm not saying it was as crazy as like.
To a certain extent, like the millennials and that like 90s grunge culture was a second wave of hippie culture.
Kind of, in many ways.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, in many ways it was.
And we were being raised by parents that were a part of the hippie culture, or at least that generation. Not our parents specifically, but that generation, that was the culture that they grew up in. And so by the time we were growing up, there was not this understood sense of responsibility and accountability and authority and leadership. All of these things became very nuanced and very foreign to us. And so when we and other people in our generation decided to return to that more traditional relationship setup and include domestic discipline, we wanted to really define what that meant.
Right.
Because we didn't have an understood definition in our heads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's my takeaway is like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having itemized rules. We do.
Sure.
But I don't think that there's anything wrong with not. If that works for you, if there's if you're able to maintain the accountability and the authority without having a set of rules, that's okay too.
By the way, I just want to clarify before we continue in this debate that if any of you, this is just a fun debate between the two of us. We don't want any couples that may be listening out here who don't have specific rules to think that, man, Coda is really being, down on us, and or if you agree, or if you're a couple that has a lot of rules within the standard, that's okay. This is just a fun little debate that we wanted to have during this podcast because Arya knows that I'm the kind of guy that's like, no, here's the standards, here's the rule. Perfect example. Okay, here's my political thing. You want to do my... Not to get political.
Not to get political.
Okay, there's my tagline for this podcast. I carry a copy of our Constitution around in my bag. And those of you may have just laughed, but here's the reason I carry a copy of that Constitution. Because I am very much aware and want other people to be aware what my rights are and what they're not. So if someone screams out, "You can't do X," and I'm doing that, I reach into my bag, I grab my Constitution because I know my Constitution, and I turn to it and I go, "Here's what the Constitution says. You are wrong. I have a right to do this. This is the standard. This is what the rule book says," and that's what the Constitution is. It's a rule book, what we can and cannot do. And so a lot of times it's, no, I have a right to do this, so too bad. And but that's one reason I carry it around, is so I've got the rules printed out and I can show people, nope, this is what it says.
So can I print out our rules, and then if you get on me about something, I can pull them out and say, nope, according to our rules.
Sure, and then we can talk about ratifying those rules, just like we talk about ratifying the Constitution, right? At times, that's why we have a government and a Congress to vote on what is constitutional, what is not, and they have the ability to change the Constitution if they want to.
But what's really interesting to me is that you're taking the position about like having really solid set up rules and predictable consequences. You're taking that position, but in past podcasts, and I know this from experience of being married to you, that you also do not like the leadership style of micromanaging. And so those seem to be in
conflict with
each other.
Excuse me. Man, we're just all where we are at in the world, it is very, very dry right now, and all of us have been fighting back summer colds.
Well,
so,
I was about to say, it rained.
It's been terrible.
It rained a lot for like 2 weeks, so everything got really, really flourishing with like blooms and pollen and everything, and then it dried out and the wind is blown. So
we apologize for the coughing that you've been hearing. Yes, you could probably say that I'm contradicting myself because I'm not a micromanager, don't want to micromanage. I tend to think here is my view of what micromanaging is. Micromanaging is not, hey, here's a specific set of rules, and let's get very, very detailed about those rules. Micromanaging is every second of the day reminding you about the rules. So in other words, I look at micromanaging as, here's the rules, you know what they are, don't cross them, and I leave you alone. That's not micromanaging. Micromanaging is, okay, here's the rules, and then 5 minutes later, don't forget the rules. Oh, by the way, 5 minutes later, don't forget the rules. That's what micromanaging is.
I can get that, but also with how you've been talking about rules and like, here's the rules, don't cross them. It also begs the question that you seem to value having rules, having predictable consequences, and kind of holding the letter of the law.
Yes.
Would you say that your actual leadership style and the...
She's putting me on the spot right now. You're all hearing it in real time.
Would you say that the way you actually, lead our home reflects those values?
I can't lie. No. And in fact, I'm trying to get better at that. And all of you are either were shocked by that, or you were just like, yeah, no, we knew that. No, the truthful answer is no. And the reason is I, in every aspect of my life, am trying to get better at doing that, but I'm not there yet because it's only recently, and this may surprise some of you as long as we've been podcasting too. It's only recently that I have come to this realization in my life that I need to be holding not only the people in my life, but myself very close and accountable to the rules and following those. Not in a way of, and because a lot of people, when they hear, being held accountable to the rules. Okay, so you're the kind of guy, you're like the, you guys remember if you are old enough to remember this, in elementary school, and I think it was even in mid school, like the hall monitor and that annoying hall monitor that was just like, they were watching your every move, and if you were staying in the hall too long or you were saying hi to one of your buddies and you're supposed to be headed back to class, they're the first ones to go, teacher, he was out doing X, Y, and Z. Not holding people accountable the way the annoying hall monitor would be, but holding yourself and your partner to the rules because that's what's best for you and for them. And those really are two different ways to approach something. One is, I'm just going to hold you to those rules, and you better do the rules because that's what good people do, is they abide by the rules, as opposed to, look, the reason we have these rules, the reason I'm holding myself accountable to rules and I'm going to hold you accountable to the rules is because I care about you. I want you to achieve goals for yourself and for our relationship. And so I'm going to hold you to these as hard as it will be so that you can be better and our relationship can be better and it can thrive because of that. Those are really two different approaches.
So getting back to, and I agree with you on that, but kind of getting back to the debate of rules versus no rules. And not no rules, but just like
you
not
just admitted it was no rules.
It's not an anarchy free-for-all, right? I mean, relationships have to have structure. They have to have standards.
I'm not going there.
But,
Anyway.
but getting kind of back to that, what about those times where there is some nuance? Because I think that this is one area that we've struggled in our relationship, because you want to have these set rules and you want to have kind of like predictable consequences. So it's like, okay, if said rule is not followed, this is what happens. But there are times where there is some nuance there. And I think that sometimes for some couples, it may make more sense to have a standard because that allows for more nuance without undermining the structure of the relationship. So for instance, if you say, hey, the standard is that we want a clean home. And if you just hold that standard, then you can have some nuance within that. And you can say, let's say the kitchen doesn't get cleaned. You can go to your wife and say, hey, we have a standard that the home needs to be cleaned. You haven't cleaned the kitchen. Why is that? And it can be more of a conversation, or it can even be a warning to be like, hey, we have a standard in this home that we want to keep a clean home. You haven't cleaned the kitchen today. It needs to be cleaned before XYZ, or there will be a consequence.
Let me interject real quick.
But if you have, let me just finish real quick. But if you have a rule, like if you have the actual like set rule, like you need to clean the kitchen, and if you don't, this happens, it doesn't allow for as much nuance in those times.
I'll agree, but I'll also disagree with you at the same time, because what happens if if you say, okay, we have this standard of wanting a clean house, and the kitchen's dirty to you, but to her, she's like, nah, it's not really that dirty.
Well, then that needs to be a conversation, right?
But what I'm saying is, if the rule was in place within that standard, it wouldn't be such a hard thing. It wouldn't be something you'd have to discuss every single time.
Well, but you don't have to discuss it every time because...
But some couples might. They might, or they might find, let me just put it this way, not always, but they might find that they are constantly a hamster in the wheel, always addressing the same thing, than to just say, okay, we're going to finally make, within this standard, a rule of how the kitchen is supposed to look.
And I think that's fine. I mean, there's a difference between saying that you need to itemize every single rule and only instilling rules where there are trouble points.
Now, here's what I will say, and I think you're absolutely right. Okay, here's another one of my taglines. 2 in this podcast, not to get political, but one of the things that I think we can agree on here, here's common ground here. One of the things I think we have an issue with in this country, and it can be in relationships too, we got too many laws, got too many rules, and I think too many rules can definitely be a problem for sure, because then you're just like, man, I've got this entire rule book, or I've got like 3 pages worth of rules that fall under one standard or category. And that's when you got too much. That's definitely true. So I would say I think I have to agree with you there.
Just a side note, if you ever want a good laugh, just like Google search like obscure laws that are still in the books.
You've done this for me before and shown me. It's crazy.
I think that there's like a law in Arkansas that you can't leave a dead raccoon on your neighbor's porch or so.
Yeah. Wasn't there? There were some really crazy ones though that are it's still in certain states about if you have an affair in your partner or something like that there's some kind of law you're not allowed to do that, otherwise they can take you to jail or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
It's crazy.
There's some funny ones, and then there's some more serious ones like that where it's like, well, and then there's some that it's just interesting.
You should do that. It actually is really funny, and so I would say I have to agree with you there. Like there has to be a balance, but what I'm trying to say is that. I don't think just having a standard is enough. You've got to have some sub rules or subcategories within that. And I know what you're saying is not having standards at all. We're not looking for anarchy. But then I think there comes a point where too many rules can definitely be an issue. There's got to be a balance in the relationship.
Well, because I think that you and I can agree that you cannot have a domestic discipline relationship and you cannot have a power differential relationship in any sort of way without a hierarchy, without a leadership and authority and then submission, right?
I agree with that.
And so it can't be relationship anarchy or egalitarianism where everybody has the exact same amount of authority and pull and decision-making power and everything is completely collaborative.
Right.
You just can't have that. You cannot have a situation where everyone's needs have the same amount of priority.
That's true. That's a good point you bring up.
So there has to be some sort of, hierarchy, and not to say that my needs never take priority, but it's kind of at your discretion of whose needs need to take priority in that situation.
Yeah. And I will, it's an area I need to improve on because I think sometimes I let you get away with a few things. Than I should.
You do let me get away with things, but I was thinking more of like big picture things, for instance, when we've had to move, sometimes,
which has been a lot.
Yeah. Most of the time it's because of your job and your need to provide for us and your need for a job in order to do that and your need for the best paying job that you can get takes priority over perhaps my want to stay where we are.
Right.
I don't think that's really ever happened. I've never been anti-moving. I kind of like it, actually. I like that.
Really?
I like the newness of being in a new place. Not necessarily the act of packing everything up and moving it.
Oh, man. I was like, wow, we've done enough moves. She's just like, yeah, I love it now.
No, this last move, I was definitely like, this whole packing and unpacking things is kind of getting old.
Yeah, so we're hoping to definitely stay where we're at.
But I like being in a new place. I like being in a new house. I like the newness of everything.
So yeah, we're gonna move every 5 years. No, just kidding.
Wow, that would be an improvement.
Ouch.
Anyway, not to get too far off topic here. But all that to say, I think that there can be a situation where a husband just says, you need to respect me and my position as a leader. And there doesn't need to be a itemized, like, that means you're not allowed to raise your voice at me. And that means that you need to ask questions this way. And that means, I think there needs to be somewhat of an understood aspect to it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because the last thing we want to do when we're setting up the standards, and even if we decide to incorporate rules, the last thing we want to do is undermine a wife's ability to understand.
Yeah.
And undermine her intelligence by itemizing things that are pretty obvious.
Right.
Because, for instance, there's no technical rule that I'm not allowed to yell at you and raise my voice to you. but it is understood that that is a disrespectful act.
Okay. Yeah, you make a good point there.
However, there is a rule that I'm not allowed to raise my voice to our child
Yeah.
because that's something that you do not want happening in our home.
Nope.
And that's not necessarily an understood expectation within that umbrella. And so you set that up as a rule. But I know that if I were to do that to you, I would also be in trouble. But it's not we never negotiated that as a specific rule.
And there's an instance maybe, again, where we're talking about maybe this shows that we're kind of both right, where we have a standard with how you treat me respectfully. And yes, so that's not a subcategory of rule. But for our daughter, it is. Because we needed to make that rule. Not that you were being... I don't want anybody to think you're being unruly and you're just yelling at our daughter all the time. But it was something that I did not want to have happen. And it happened with me as a child growing up to the point where I did not want her to have that experience that I had.
And
so,
on the flip side, there's no rule. Like, you don't put any parameters or rules around my spending.
Maybe I should. I'm just kidding.
But there are...
You do good. You do good.
I do, because I understand our budget, and I
Well, you do the budget.
I do the budget.
Right.
There are some people that would say that that's wrong, that a husband in a leadership position should be the one doing the budget.
Golly.
And I say, do what works best for your relationship, because I happen to just be better at that aspect.
That's why, because we remember when I was running, it was awful. It was terrible.
And so, but there are some women that have come out and talked about how their husbands have taken away their credit cards because of overspending, or they've gotten punished because of overspending, or both. And so it's one of those things that's not a rule. That's not even a standard in our relationship, because it's not an issue. But for other women who have issues with overspending, that may be something that is a very necessary part of their dynamic in order to reach the goals that they have as a couple.
So I think you just admitted, though, that within a relationship, there needs to be standard and rules depending on the relationship.
Okay, here's the thing. I think you can start your domestic discipline with standards only, and then
progress into rules.
Progress into rules as they become necessary. It's not necessary to itemize a laundry list of rules from the very beginning. If you don't want to. Some people want to, but if you are just like, no, we don't really want to do that, set up your standards and then progress into rule building only as things become necessary.
You might be right, but I think eventually you're going to progress into rules anyway.
Maybe you're right. I don't know.
I think it'd be fun sorry, did you finish your...
Yes,
your
I
statement?
did. Yeah.
Okay. I think it'd be fun, just for fun, leave in the comments or something who you think won this debate. Did Aria win this debate, or did Coda win this debate? I just want to know what our listeners would think.
I would love to know what the listeners think. Objectively, I think that you did prove the point that rules are necessary. I will take the victory. I would give it to you if I was deciding, because...
Well, thanks. That's really nice. I think you argued your point very, very well, though, I will say. But I'm still going to take the win on that. Sorry.
Thanks for coming along this journey with us, though.
Yeah, but I want to know in the comments. I just want to know what you guys think. Who do you think won this debate? Coda. Anyway. So I'm glad you all tuned in and everything. I'm trying to remember.
So thank you for joining us today.
Yep.
Hope you enjoyed this discussion. Let us know what you thought down below. If you want bonus content from us, as well as early access to the podcast, our Patreon is listed and linked down in the description box. If you want to reach out through Instagram or email, all of that is listed down below for you as well.
And I don't know, but hopefully by the time this podcast is heard, I will have had released my first solo podcast, Coda's Corner.
Yes, on the Patreon.
On the Patreon, yes, Patreon only. But if you want to get that content, that's where it's at.
And if you like this video, please like it. And if you are not already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us out. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for listening. And for the Patreons, we'll see you in the post show.